Hello, it's Randi Rhodes. Here's a clip from our show, and go to randirhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.
We believe that all men are equal.
The magnificent mosaic that is America's radio kingdom, that is radio kingdom. I have a dream. Change has come to America.
Believe it.
Change has come to America.
Who's there?
Who's there?
It's a figment of your imagination.
Turn up your mind. Turn up your mind.
As you know, you can't get a warrant like this, a wiretapping warrant like this, unless they can demonstrate probable cause you were working as a foreign agent. And you actually had been on the FBI's radar for working for Russia for several years. You were the target of a Russian recruitment effort back in 2013. The FBI interviewed you about that, correct?
I was a witness to a case that they were doing, so I was supporting the FBI in that case.
Right. You gave documents, though, to someone they believe they charged with espionage.
See, this is sort of spin, because I was teaching a course down Broadway here at NYU, and I told him a couple of things about what I was talking about in my course, and I gave him a couple of my notes the documents that I gave my students. So in terms of, it sounds, when you say giving documents to a quote-unquote spy, and, it's in a couple of courses. Yeah. Well, it sounds a lot worse than reality, but that's reality.
You also wrote just a couple months after that, in September 2013, to an academic press saying, this was reported by Time magazine, over the past half year, I've had the privilege to serve as an informal advisor to the staff of the Kremlin. So you were recruited at one point by a Russian agent. Then you wrote yourself that you're an informal advisor to the Kremlin. So that does lead people to believe, is this guy working with Russia?
Well, first of all, it's the G20 summit was in St. Petersburg that year, and they were bringing together people from around the world. And so a lot of people were from literally Australia, UK, here.
But these are your words. I served as an informal advisor to the staff of the Kremlin. You're advising the Kremlin.
Okay. So we understand that Carter Page is full of crap here. Okay, we understand that he's going, well, it was the G20 and people were coming from all over the world. Yes, but not to help the Kremlin. Only you were helping the Kremlin. All right, so let's go through this timeline. This is an amazing thing. This should refresh everything that you know, and even some stuff that you forgot that you know. But let's go back to January of 2013. That is what's being discussed right there in Good Morning America with Carter Page. At that time, Carter Page was an energy industry consultant. And he met a man that yesterday we were calling him podiatrist, right? Because his name is Victor Podobny. Podobny. It was at a conference in New York. And he started sharing with him basic immaterial information and publicly available research documents in pages words. Okay, that's what he said. He says he was teaching a course at NYU, and he gave this guy from Russia the same stuff he gives his students. Except Podobny, turns out, was an officer with the Russian Foreign Intelligence Service and was later charged with being an agent of the Russian government. 6 months later, the FBI interviews Carter Page after Victor Podobny is picked up on surveillance, because we record people who are foreign agents or who we think are foreign agents by getting the FISA court to do it, right? And so he's recorded by our intelligence officials. And what are they saying to each other, these Russian intelligence officers? They are identifying Carter Page as a target for recruitment. They are saying to each other, it's obvious that he wants to earn lots of money. Podobny says about Carter Page. Now, I've read you more of that conversation in other settings, right? Just know that this is the case that Carter Page is talking about. Okay, so that's in June of 2013. In August, Carter Page sends a letter to a publisher making the case for his expertise on Russian matters. And he writes, quote, over the past half year, I have had the privilege to serve as an informal advisor to the staff of the Kremlin in preparation for their presidency of the G20 summit next month, where energy issues will be a prominent point on the agenda. August 25th, 2013. On September 4th, 2013, Robert Mueller retires as the FBI director, and James Comey becomes director of the FBI. On November 9th of the same year, 2013, the Miss Universe pageant is held in Moscow by the Trump Organization. The event's location was secured by a licensing deal of nearly $20 million paid by a Moscow real estate development firm called Crocus Group. Who is Crocus Group? Well, the president of Crocus Group is Aras Agararilov. Agararilev's son, Emin Agararilov, is the vice president of the Crocus Group and a pop singer in Russia. All right, let's fast forward 2 years later. The former Defense Intelligence Agency head, Michael Flynn, begins advising ACU Strategic Partners. ACU Strategic Partners is a company that wants to build nuclear power plants in the Middle East in partnership with Russia. But not just any Russia, a sanctioned Russian company. Of all the companies he could have picked to partner with to build nuclear, power plants in the Middle East, he chooses a sanctioned Russian company. All right. That's April of 2015. On June 16th, Donald Trump announces he's running for president. 2015. July 24th, 2015. Right after he announces, like 2 weeks later, Rob Goldstone, who is the publicist for Emin Agararilov of the Crocus Group, who paid Trump $20 million to bring Miss Universe to Moscow, emails Trump's assistant in New York to set up a meeting with Vladimir Putin. We don't know if what happened to that offer. That's still an open question. Sometime in the summer of 2015, hackers who are linked now to the Russian Federal Security Service, the FSB, which is the old KGB, gain access to the Democratic National Committee's networks, according to our own intelligence agencies. September of 2015, Trump's associate, who he also does not know, he says, never met him, wouldn't pick him out in a lineup. He says this under oath in a deposition where he lied 130 times, by the way. But Felix Sater, an associate of Donald Trump, reaches out to the Trump Organization about a development project in Moscow to be financed by Russia's government-owned bank, Neshvikombank. That bank is under sanctions also by the U.S. government. Despite this fact, Trump signs a letter of intent to move forward with the project with this sanctioned Russian bank in September of 2015. This is after he announced he was running for president. Either in September or October, the conservative website, the Washington Free Beacon, hires Fusion GPS. This is a conservative guy named Paul Singer. He hires in September or October of 2015, Fusion GPS to do the research on several Republican candidates, including Donald Trump. November 3rd, Felix Sater emails Michael Cohen, Trump's attorney, and he writes, I will get Putin on this program, meaning the sanctioned Russian bank and the Trump development. And he says, we will have a ribbon cutting ceremony and Putin will attend. Quote, I will get Putin on this program and we will get Donald Trump elected. Sater writes, Felix Sater. Following month, December 10th, 2015, Flynn goes to Moscow. That's the picture of him, and that's the picture of Jill Stein sitting at the table with Vladimir Putin for an anniversary party for Russia Today, the Russian TV propaganda machine in the United States, for which he is paid. Flynn gets paid. And officials start to notice an increase in communications between Michael Flynn and Sergei Kislyak, the Russian ambassador, following that event. Now, remember, we're wiretapping these Russians. And all of a sudden, Flynn is being picked up on these intercepts, talking to the Russians more and more after that Russia Today, that RT event. Late in 2015, which was about 3 months after Fusion was hired by the Republican website Free Beacon, Paul Singer, the British intelligence agencies detect suspicious interactions between Russia and Trump aides. This information gets passed on to our U.S. intelligence agencies. These people are now on U.S. intelligence radar. Mid-January 2016, Michael Cohen, Trump's lawyer, emails Putin's personal spokesman seeking help in advancing the development in Moscow. Quote, "As this project is too important, I am hereby requesting your assistance. I respectfully request someone, preferably you, contact me so that I might discuss the specifics as well as arranging meetings with the appropriate individuals. I thank you in advance for your assistance, and I look forward to hearing from you soon, Michael Cohen." Goldstone emails Donald Trump Jr. after that to pitch the Trump team on setting up a social media site in Russia. It's called Vakontakte. Trump Jr. passes this on to Dan Scavino, who's in charge of social media for the Trump campaign. Quote, Dan Scavino writes back, quote, "Please feel free to send me whatever you have." Konstantin Sidikorov, director of partnership marketing for Vakontakte, shows up, follows up a few days later, says, "Nice to meet you and your team." He writes to Dan Scavino, the social media guy for the Trump campaign. Just remember that. He emails Dan Scavino, he emails Donald Trump Jr., and he emails Donald Trump Sr.'s assistant in New York. Late in January of 2016, for some reason, the Moscow project is totally abandoned. February 1st begins the primary, the voting in Iowa. So like 2 days before the primary starts, this is when they say we're not interested in pursuing this Moscow project after all this, right? Okay. March 6th, 2016 is the day that we get the names of Trump's foreign policy team. This is when we're first introduced to Carter Page, PhD, and George Papadopoulos, excellent guy. March 14th, which is a week later, Papadopoulos is in Italy, and he's meeting with a London-based professor named Joseph Mifsud. He's the director of the London Academy of Diplomacy. This professor learns that Papadopoulos is tied to the Trump campaign, and Mifsud says he's uninterested in talking to Papadopoulos. March 19th, 2016, John Podesta is sent a phishing email encouraging him to change his password. And after he does do that, they have his password and they hack his account. March 21st, which is 3 days later, during an interview with the Washington Post, Trump tells the Washington Post that Carter Page is from a part of his foreign policy team. And they ask him, where did you find him? Page had been recommended by the son-in-law of President Richard Nixon, the party chairman in New York, the New York Republican Party chairman, Ed Cox. Trump also mentions George Papadopoulos. 7 days later, they hire Paul Manafort. Paul Manafort is supposed to handle the delegate process for the RNC, for the Republican National Convention. He's recommended by Roger Stone. But before Manafort was recommended to the Trump campaign by Roger Stone, of course, Manafort was already living in Trump Tower, which is just, coincidence, right? Manafort was lobbying on behalf of Oleg Deripaska, who is a big oligarch, who is a very close friend of Vladimir Putin's. And that relationship followed a memo from Manafort where he wrote to Oleg Deripaska offering him a plan that could, quote, greatly benefit the Putin government. We believe that this plan is the plan to infiltrate American politics at the very highest levels, and that he was paid by Oleg Deripaska $10 million to give Oleg Deripaska that plan. Well, his relationship with Oleg Deripaska ended in 2009, but before that, Manafort worked on the Party of Regions in Ukraine. We all know that he worked with Viktor Yanukovych, who was later ousted but was Putin's ally in Ukraine. This is who they pick. On March 31st, 3 days later, Trump's foreign policy team meets. Papadopoulos is at the meeting. Alabama Senator Jeff Sessions is at the meeting. Donald Trump is at the meeting. Papadopoulos at that meeting says he can facilitate a meeting between Donald Trump and Vladimir Putin based on his interactions with this professor that he met in Italy, Mifsud. Jeff Sessions says that can't happen. In April of 2016, the hackers who are tied to Russia's main intelligence, GRU, gain access to the entire DNC network. That same month, after the DNC is hacked by Russia, that is when Perkins Coie, the law firm associated with the DNC, hires Fusion GPS to pick up because Paul Singer is pulling out and doesn't want to fund the Oppo research anymore. Just so you know, the DNC was hacked in April of 2016. The lawyer for the DNC at Perkins Coie knows that that the DNC has been hacked. He's the lawyer for the DNC. He hires Fusion GPS to get to the bottom of this hacking. April 11th, Paul Manafort sends an email to Konstantin Kilmanik, who everybody believes has ties to Russian intelligence, to tell him that the oligarch Deripaska's operation has seen his media coverage and presumably about the Trump campaign. And he says, how do I use this to get whole? Meaning Deripaska wants his money back. And so Manafort is writing to a friend of Deripaska saying, no, look at the media. Look at the media. They're covering, exactly, my plan. They're doing my plan. Look at the media. You can see it's being covered. The plan is happening. I don't owe you the money back. I'm doing it. A week later, Papadopoulos is introduced via email to someone who has contacts in Russia's Ministry of Foreign Affairs. Papadopoulos and this contact inside the Russian ministry start communicating regularly, and they keep trying to set up the meeting between Trump and Putin. A week later, Papadopoulos is told by this guy he met in Italy, the professor, Mr. Mifsud, that the Russians have dirt on Hillary Clinton. Quote, they have thousands of emails. Well, now somebody's lying. Mifsud says he didn't want to have anything to do with Papadopoulos because he found out Papadopoulos was with the Trump campaign. And yet it is this man, Mifsud, who tells Papadopoulos that there is dirt on Hillary Clinton. Quote, they have thousands of emails. The next day, Jared Kushner meets Ambassador Kislyak at the Mayflower Hotel in Washington before a foreign policy speech that Trump is about to give. And Sessions also speaks to Kislyak at that Mayflower Hotel speech. That same day, Papadopoulos sends an email to Stephen Miller, the senior Trump campaign advisor, the white nationalist, the white supremacist, to say he had, quote, some interesting messages coming in from Moscow about a trip there when the time is right. May 2016 is when the London meeting happens between Papadopoulos and the Australia High Commissioner to Great Britain, Alexander Downer. And he tells Alexander Downer that the Russians have dirt on Hillary Clinton. During May of 2016, two different people who support Trump email the campaign to set up a meeting between a Trump staff member and a Russian official named Alexander Torshin. The emails were sent to Rick Dearborn. Now, Rick Dearborn used to be the chief of staff to Jeff Sessions, and now he's working in the campaign on the foreign policy portion of the campaign specifically. That's who Rick Dearborn is. The emails that were sent to Rick Dearborn are titled Kremlin Connection. The other email is titled Russian Backdoor Overture and Dinner Invite. Jared Kushner rejects the dinner invite. On May 20th or the 21st, Alexander Torshin and Trump Jr. meet at the dinner, except this dinner is at the National Rifle Association in Louisville, Kentucky. Now, subsequently, we got reporting that the Russians had infiltrated the NRA and that other conservative organizations, including uber-religious organizations in this country, both Christian and Orthodox Jewish, Chabad, and all that. Okay. May 26th, Trump gets the Republican nomination on paper. June, there's a closed-door meeting of foreign policy experts and the Prime Minister of India. Carter Page is at this meeting, and he praises Putin effusively. June 3rd, Goldstone, who's the publicist for the Aguilar's, emails Donald Trump Jr., and here's the email. It says, the Crown Prosecutor of Russia met with Emin Aguilar's father, Aris, this morning, and in their meeting offered to provide the Trump campaign with some official documents and information that would incriminate Hillary and her dealings with Russia and would be very helpful to your father. This is obviously very high level and sensitive information, but it's part of Russia and its government support for Mr. Trump, helped along by Aris and Emin. Seems we have some time. Trump Jr. replies, seems we have some time. And if it's what you say, I love it, especially in the summer. That's what Junior replies. Now, Junior's sitting on the TV last night, playing this Babe in the Woods routine. June 6th, Goldstone appears to connect Emin Aguilarov and Trump Jr. on the telephone. June 7th, the next day, Goldstone and Trump Jr. finalize, quote, a meeting with you and the Russian government attorney. That's Natalia. June 7th is also the day that Trump formally gets the nomination, later that day. That evening, Trump gives a speech, and he says at that speech, quote, I'm going to give a major speech on probably Monday of next week, and we're going to be discussing all of the things that have taken place with the Clintons. I think you're going to find it very informative and very interesting, indicating he now has dirt on Hillary Clinton, and he'll be talking about that the very next week. This is the day he gets the nomination, June 7th, if you want to find the YouTube. June 9th, 2 days later, Trump Jr., Manafort, Jared Kushner meet at Trump Tower with the Kremlin-connected attorney, Natalia Veselnitskaya. Her efforts have always been reversing the 2012 sanctions that were imposed upon Russia for violating human rights. And at some point, the FBI found out about this meeting and got very interested in it. The meeting was not initially reported to the government by Jared Kushner as required when he took a position with the administration. And after the meeting was originally reported, Trump Jr. admitted that the pretext for the conversation was that he believed that Natalia Veselnitskaya was going to give dirt, the incriminating information, to him on Hillary Clinton. That's bullcrap, and I'll tell you why. They already had it. And you know that because the day that Trump takes the nomination, he says he's got the dirt. He's going to tell you about it the next week, right? The meeting also included a lobbyist named Rinat Akhmetshin. He also is linked to Russian intelligence. June 12th, in an interview with ITV, WikiLeaks' Julian Assange says, I got more emails from Hillary Clinton. The next day, instead of giving the speech that Trump promised about the dirt on Hillary Clinton, he talks about national security because the Pulse nightclub in Orlando happens. 2 days later, there's a hacker named Guccifer 2.0, and he releases the Democratic National Committee's research file on Donald Trump. The stolen data is linked to Russian hackers. 5 days later, Christopher Steele, former MI6 Russia expert, now working for Fusion GPS, compiles the first of 17 reports that become part of the dossier. The first report alleges contacts between the Trump campaign and the Russians and Russian intelligence. The first report cites conversations suggesting Russia actively sought to compromise Trump beginning in 2011, and that the Russians had compromising information on Trump and Hillary. 9 days later, Goldstone, the publicist for the Agaralovs, reaches out to Dan Scavino about this, social website. He writes, I'm following up on an email from a while back of something I had mentioned to Don Jr. and Paul Manafort during a meeting recently. He wrote in an email. At the time, Manafort said he would welcome it. June 30th, Carter Page tells Jeff Sessions he will travel to Moscow to give the speech. He later indicates that the campaign approved his travel, but he had to say he wasn't representing the campaign. That's the last day of June. At some point in July, early in the month, the FBI starts investigating links between the Russian government and the Trump campaign. July of 2016. It was triggered when the Australian authorities contacted the FBI because the Papadopoulos story to the ambassador from Australia to the UK relays this to his country's intelligence. Australian authorities then contact the FBI and they say that Papadopoulos made mention of Russian dirt to their ambassador to the UK, and that the diplomat, Downer, was validated by the release of the stolen data. Early in July, Fusion GPS's Michael Steele also contacts the FBI to inform them of what he has heard about Donald Trump gathering dirt on Hillary Clinton. So this is all in July of 2016. The Australian intelligence agencies contact the FBI, and they relay the story about Papadopoulos. And then after that, but in the same month, this is when Steele feels the need to report what he says is a crime in progress, because they all see the hacking happening and they all see the releasing of the hacked materials. Now, Steele had been a source for the FBI in the past. Why? Because he was MI6 and he was a Russia specialist. And our counterintelligence agencies at the FBI Russia desk had worked with him and found him to be credible in the past. July 7th, idiot boy Carter Page goes to Moscow and gives this anti-American lecture. That same day, July 7th, Manafort contacts Kilminnick again to tell Oleg Deripaska, it's happening. My plan is happening. You need to get a private briefing on the campaign. Because Oleg Deripaska still wants his money back, because he believes Manafort came up with a plan to infiltrate the United States at the highest levels, but it never happened, and he wants his money back because he pitched this plan before 2009, and now it's 2016, and he's suing him. Next day, Carter Page sends a memo to the Trump campaign staff, debriefing them on what happened in Moscow. It reads, in part, quote, Russian Deputy Prime Minister and new Economic School Board member Arkady Dvorkovich also spoke before the event. In a private conversation, Dvorkovich expressed strong support for Mr. Trump and a desire to work together toward devising better solutions in response to the vast range of current international problems. He's debriefing them on his visit to Moscow. The whole campaign, Carter Page is. July 11th or the 12th, the campaign staffers apparently intervene with the committee that is doing the Republican Party's platform for the Republican National Committee. the Republican Party is talked into changing the national security platform to remove language that called for the arming of Ukraine so it might protect itself against Russian aggression. Their platform is changed. A week later, the Heritage Foundation hosts an event as part of the Republican National Convention. Jeff Sessions and Ambassador Kislyak meet there and have a conversation. That same day is the day that Flynn delivers the speech at the Republican convention with the lock her up chant. He said, if I, a guy who knows this business, if I did a tenth of what she did, I would be in jail today. The next day, Michael Steele files his report. In this report, he alleges that Carter Page's trip to Moscow included the meetings with the chief executive of the energy firm Rosneft and the Kremlin's official Igor Divyakin. Igor is the person who mentioned the Russian government had dirt on Hillary Clinton. 3 days later, WikiLeaks releases the emails from the DNC, and the Democratic National Convention starts 3 days later. 2 days later, during a news conference, Trump asks Russia if they're listening to release the hacked emails from Hillary's private server. He says he was joking. August 9th, Flynn Intel Group, which is Michael Flynn's consulting company, signs a contract with Novo BV, a firm run by a Turkish businessman close to the Turkish president, Recep Erdogan, and receives $500,000. August 14th, the New York Times reports that in Ukraine, they have the Ukrainian citizens have gone into the house of former Yanukovych, you know, the former prime minister, the former dictator of Ukraine, who was Putin's guy, and they find his ledgers in his house. And there are off-the-book payments to Paul Manafort and his consulting firm in these ledgers. The New York Times publishes this, and it looks as if the payments were hidden by being passed through third parties, according to the leaders in Ukraine. 5 days later, Manafort is fired. Jared Kushner wants him gone. 3 days later, or 2 days later, Roger Stone tweets, "Trust me, it will soon be Podesta's time in the barrel." 2 days later, Roger Stone communicates with Guccifer 2.0 privately on Twitter. At some point in September, congressional leaders are briefed about the CIA's belief that Russia was intervening in the election to benefit Donald Trump. September 8th, Jeff Sessions has Ambassador Kislyak into his Senate office. He calls him and has him come, and they have a private meeting. September 20th, WikiLeaks messages Jr. privately over Twitter, and they point to a new site that links Putin to Trump. And the next day, Jr. responds, "I'll ask around about it." Trump Jr. then emails the senior campaign staff about this message that's linking Trump to Russia and Putin and asks, "Do you know the people mentioned?" Referring to those behind the Putin-Trump site, and what the conspiracy they are looking for could be. Now, remember, they're discussing setting up this social website, right? Okay. So September 23rd is the day that Michael Isikoff at Yahoo News, interviews with Michael Steele and reports that Carter Page may have met with the officials from Rosneft. Carter Page may have met with officials from the Kremlin. September 26, 2016, in an interview with the Post, Carter Page separates publicly from the Trump campaign. So when he goes to Moscow, he's still part of the Trump campaign. And he's freaking wired. Okay? And not wired, that's the wrong word. They're eavesdropping on Carter Page. They've already got a FISA warrant on Carter Page. So when Carter Page goes to Moscow, and he's on the phone and all this stuff. He's being wiretapped. But then, and he debriefs the Trump campaign about everything that happened in Russia, even though he said he went there by him, no relation to the Trump campaign. But then he officially separates in September, on September 26th. Early October, Michael Steele meets with the FBI in Rome to discuss the research. October 2nd, Roger Stone tweets about an upcoming WikiLeaks revelation. He says Wednesday, October 5th, at Hillary Clinton is done, hashtag WikiLeaks. The next day, WikiLeaks again contacts Trump Jr. This time they ask him to have the campaign offer a response to a quote from Hillary Clinton. Trump Jr. replies, already did that. Shortly after that, he asks about the new information referenced by Roger Stone, but nobody responds to Jr. 4 days later, the Director of National Intelligence and the head of the Department of Homeland Security release a very unusual joint statement in which they say publicly that Russia is meddling in the election, and they suggest that Russia has a hand in the WikiLeaks document releases, which is ongoing. It's a crime that's still happening in real time. Then shortly after that, we get the Access Hollywood video. And as soon as we get the Access Hollywood video, like minutes later, WikiLeaks releases the first emails from Podesta. Those leaks continued for weeks and weeks. They leaked out this recipe for risotto and that recipe for risotto, and then the one with the slow broth, which is the good risotto. Do you know what I mean? And this goes on and on. October 11th, Trump Jr. goes to Paris, France. He gives a paid speech to a group that supports Russian interests. And after his speech, one of the people who hosted him in Paris goes to Moscow, and she discusses the speech that Jr. gave with a senior Russian official. The next day, WikiLeaks again contacts Trump Jr., and they want to share a link to some files. Shortly after that, Trump tweets about the leaks. Same day, Roger Stone tells a reporter from a local news station here in Florida that he has a back channel with WikiLeaks, with Julian Assange, but he never speaks to Assange directly. I think that was Jim Feedy was the local reporter. WikiLeaks denies that they're talking in any way to Roger Stone. October 14th, Jr. goes ahead and tweets the link that he got from WikiLeaks on Twitter in Twitter Messenger 2 days earlier. Mike Pence goes on Fox News and he denies any connection between the entire Trump campaign and WikiLeaks. Meanwhile, they're all communicating with WikiLeaks. October 18th, which is 4 days later, Michael Steele files another report suggesting that Carter Page's discussions with Rosneft in July included payment to Carter Page. He, for doing what he was doing, would get a stake of Rosneft if he could get the sanctions lifted on Russia. The next day was the debate between Hillary and Donald Trump. And Trump says, Putin has no respect for my opponent. Putin has no respect for Hillary. And Hillary responds, that's because he'd rather have a puppet as president of the United States. Trump's brilliant response is, no puppet, no puppet, you're the puppet, you're the puppet. And then he says during the debate that he doesn't know and Clinton doesn't know who's behind the hacking. She doesn't know if it's Russia or China or anybody else. Fat guy sitting on his bed. October 21st, the FBI applies for and is granted a Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act warrant to surveil Carter Page, who by this point is no longer part of the Trump campaign. October 28th, a week later, Comey sends a letter to Congress announcing the discovery of new emails related to an investigation into Clinton's use of a private server. 2 days later, Harry Reid, the Senate minority leader at the time, Harry has since retired, sends a public letter to James Comey, which I have, arguing that the FBI has explosive information about close ties and coordination between Donald Trump and his top advisors and the Russian government. The next day, it's Halloween, the New York Times runs a story suggesting that the FBI didn't see a clear link between Russia and the Trump campaign. Very weird. But hours later, Mother Jones reports on the existence of the Steele dossier. The FBI subsequently cuts off its relationship with Michael Steele because they know Michael Steele has gone to David Corn, that he has talked to the press. On November 5th, this social website, Vicante, again pitches setting up a page for Trump on their site, saying it would be, quote, the top news in Russia. 3 days later, an opinion piece supporting the Turkish government written by Michael Flynn appears in The Hill, where he's advocating for the Turkish government. Trump is elected president the same day. During the transition, 2 days later, Barack Obama has Donald Trump to the Oval Office. He warns President-elect Trump not to hire Michael Flynn, the national security advisor. A week later, Trump hires Flynn, and he hires him to be our national security advisor. He offers Jeff Sessions the attorney general's job. These are the first two appointments Trump makes. Late in November, the Trump transition team warned Flynn that his communications with Kislyak will be monitored by U.S. intelligence agencies, and they try to impress upon Flynn the risks of cozying up to the Russian ambassador. The team requests a dossier on Kislyak to share with Michael Flynn. No one knows if Michael Flynn ever read it. Then on November 28th, in an interview with Time magazine, Trump denies interference from Russia, saying, I don't believe they interfered. That became a laughing point, not a talking point, a laughing point. Anytime I do something, they say, oh, Russia interfered. He also addressed the hacking, saying it could be Russia, it could be China, it could be some guy in his house in New Jersey. November 30th, the Justice Department tells Flynn he is under investigation for unreported lobbying on behalf of Turkey. And December 1st, Flynn and Kushner meet with Kislyak again at Trump Tower. Jared Kushner, now warned through Flynn that they would be listened to if they were talking to Russians, says, let's set up a back channel of communication between the administration and Putin. Maybe we could use secure communication systems at the Russian embassy. The FBI believes the conversation may have included a suggestion by the Russians that easing sanctions will allow Russian banks to offer the financing they've been after to the people who have ties to Trump. People close to Jared Kushner indicate the only focus of the back channel would have been Syria, which, by the way, we have given up on Syria. You know that. Gave it to Putin. December 8th, Page is back in Moscow to meet with business leaders and thought leaders. December 13th, Michael Steele's final report is filed, and it focuses on a trip allegedly taken by Michael Cohen to Prague in August. Michael Cohen denies taking this trip, but there is no evidence to the contrary. We've seen nothing that debunks that. All we've heard is, that Trump asked for Michael Cohen to show him his passport. That's all we've gotten. Okay, same day, December 13th, at Kislyak's urging, Jared Kushner meets with Sergei Gorkov, the chairman of this Veshnikom bank, which is under sanctions, and also a Putin confidant. The bank, again, is under sanctions from the U.S. government, and still Jared Kushner takes another meeting with them. On December 14th, Gorkov flies to Japan as Putin was flying to Japan. They meet in Japan. December 22nd, Flynn reaches out to Kislyak again. He tells Russia to oppose a resolution about Israeli settlements at the behest of Jared Kushner. Christmas Day, Flynn texts Kislyak Merry Christmas. 3 days later, the Obama administration orders new sanctions against Russian organizations and individuals in response to the Russian interference in the election. Kislyak calls Flynn. The next day, the 29th of December, Flynn calls Kislyak. Oh, that's me. I'm pounding the table. Flynn calls Kislyak 5 times. They talk about the sanctions. At some point, Flynn communicates with KT McFarland about the conversations. KT McFarland shares her thoughts with the other transition team officials. She outlines the political assessment of the Obama administration in her view, including that Russia had just, quote, thrown the election to Trump. Flynn asks the Russians not to retaliate on the sanctions. Don't do anything. Obama's going to put sanctions. Don't do anything. The next day, Trump praises Putin in a tweet, how smart he is not to fall for the U.S. sanctions. I always knew he was a smart guy. December 31st, Kislyak tells Flynn that the Russian response was a function of Trump's request. January 4th, Flynn informs Don McGahn, the White House counsel, but at the time he was the chief attorney for the transition, that Flynn is under investigation by the FBI. So Flynn tells Don McGahn. Don McGahn knows Flynn is under investigation by the FBI on January 4th. And this before they're sworn in. January 6th, the American intelligence agencies release a report outlining why they believe Russia was behind the campaign hacking. And Comey attends a briefing at Trump Tower in which he tells the president-elect that he isn't personally under investigation as part of the agency's counterintelligence case, but he also tells him what's in the Steele dossier. On January 9th, the transition team announces that Kushner will join the administration as an unpaid senior advisor. On January 10th, the Senate has a confirmation hearing for Jeff Sessions. In that hearing, Al Franken asks Jeff Sessions what would he do if anyone affiliated with the Trump campaign communicated with the Russian government in the course of this campaign. And Sessions replies, I've been called a surrogate at a time or two in that campaign, and I did not have communications with the Russians, and I'm unable to comment on it. Of course, that's not true. And then Susan Rice, who's leaving as National Security Advisor, asks Michael Flynn to approve an operation in Syria backed and joined by the Kurdish forces that would extend into Trump's presidency. And of course, Flynn is aligned with the Turkish government, and the Turkish government hates the Kurds because the Kurds want their own separate state called Kurdistan, right? Now they live in Turkey. And so Flynn declines to allow us to do anything in Syria with the Kurds. He says no. January 11th, there's a news conference, and Trump discusses the hacking that took place and says, as far as hacking, I think it was Russia, but I think we also get hacked by other countries and other people. On January 15th, Pence denies that Flynn and Kislyak discussed sanctions on CBS Face the Nation. 2 days later, Senator Patrick Leahy sends a list of questions to Jeff Sessions, including one that reads, have you been in contact with anyone connected to any part of the Russian government about the 2016 election, either before or after Election Day? Sessions replies, no. January 18th, Kushner submits his application for a top security clearance. He leaves out all these meetings that he's had with Russians and other foreign officials. And on the 20th, Trump's inaugurated. So they obviously know. Flynn knows. He's under everybody, and he still becomes our national security advisor. This is just amazing. So on January 20th, minutes after Trump is sworn in, Flynn texts during the inaugural, and some people will remember this. This was outrageous. But during the inaugural, Flynn texts a partner at ACU, the consulting firm that in Turkey, the nuclear power plant efforts with the sanctioned Russian companies, and says, sanctions will soon be gone. The project is good to go. The 22nd of January, Flynn is sworn in as our national security advisor. The 24th of January, The FBI interviews Flynn about his conversation with Kislyak the previous month. He lies to the FBI. On January 25th, Sally Yates gets the breakdown of the Flynn interview with the FBI, and she informs the White House that he lied to the FBI about what was said. On the 26th of January, she goes back to meet with Don McGahn, now the White House counsel, and explains that public statements from the vice president contradict what was known about Flynn, and now Russia could compromise the national security advisor by threatening to leak the information. And McGahn briefs Trump on that conversation. A lawyer for Trump acknowledges that Trump believed that Flynn had lied to the FBI by the end of the month, but doesn't fire Flynn. January 27th, Sally Yates goes back to the White House because he asked to see the evidence. She brings it. Trump calls James Comey that afternoon at 12 o'clock at noon to ask him to come to dinner at the White House. Trump asks Comey to pledge his loyalty. Comey says, I can only pledge honesty. Comey tells Trump that the president is not under investigation, but Flynn is. Trump signs an executive order barring residents of certain countries from entering the United States. That's the Muslim ban. Papadopoulos is then interviewed, all in the same day. Papadopoulos is interviewed at the FBI, where he says untrue things about his interactions with this guy in Italy, this this professor, Misfud. January 30th, Sally Yates invites Don McGahn over to the FBI to review the evidence against Flynn. That same day, Trump fires Sally Yates. February 6th, the lawyer for the Trump Organization, Michael Cohen, and Felix Sater partner with a Ukrainian lawmaker on a proposal for easing Russian-Ukrainian tensions, which is delivered to Flynn's office. Sessions is confirmed on the 8th. The next day, Flynn's spokesman said, yeah, he did discuss sanctions. February 11th, he files a false financial disclosure. He omits any payments from Russia today. The 13th, he resigns. The 14th, Trump calls a meeting in the Oval Office, clears the Oval Office, clears the room, and says to Comey, after Comey is left alone with the president, Flynn's a good guy. I hope you can let this go. The next day, Comey tells Jeff Sessions, never leave me alone in a room with the president. Never. It's wrong to do. It's not proper. And in mid-February, Andrew McCabe is told to publicly deny a February 14th New York Times report about communication between the Trump staff and Russia during the election. It goes on and on. There's more. It'll take you like right up. It's on my website. It's at randyrhodes.com, okay? This is amazing how people who they knew were under FBI investigation still got sworn in, one after the other it's frightening. And then now, just so you know, Bannon defies a subpoena. He will not testify. He will not testify. Oh, Dan Coates, who is the DNI now, and Mike Pompeo, the CIA director, he clears the room and tells just those two to stay in the room. And then during that private conversation, Trump asked Dan Coates and Pompeo to intervene with the FBI, to end the investigation into Michael Flynn, to shut down the Flynn investigation. March 30th, Trump calls Comey and says, what can be done to lift the cloud? March 31st, Flynn amends his financial disclosure. April, Kushner is a person of interest. Buy a stinking podcast. Go to randyrhodes.com for the whole thing and a podcast. Buy a stinking podcast.